My name is Emmanuel Tarfa, and today we'll be talking about the fundamentals of macroeconomics in simple language. How do we make something so important less complicated to understand? That's what my objective is, and you're welcome to today's session. Now, what inspired this session is that a lot of professionals do not really understand macroeconomic presentations, especially when presented by economists and market analysts. So we decided a non-expert like me, even though I read economics in my BSc, should come and explain it in a way that ordinary people would understand and see the value of such an endeavor. And that's why we're doing this. Furthermore, like I said in my article, a lot of professionals, and you can't blame them, they do pretend like as if they get it, but they don't. So when the big names come and they're running through the slides and calling all kinds of things, because they're not using structured thinking, which you'll see a little bit about that shortly, it's very difficult to track. So very quickly, why is this conversation very, what's the premise for some of the things we're doing here? Now, I like to state the case. Number one, and these are like disclaimers, I'm not a practicing economist. I'm not here to impress you either, right? My simple approach is a deliberate attempt to help you better understand the subject, all right? Two, the presentation is very simplistic. In fact, some experts will criticize me for some of the ways I'm going to explain these things, because I'm actually going to give you incomplete definitions, partial definitions. And why? I just have 45 minutes. And the typical temptation for any expert is to shovel everything down your throat, which at the end of the day, you leave confused. So based on my own wisdom and understanding of how this should work, I picked my battles in being able, so that when you leave here with something. My goal is you leave here with something that will germinate and will change the trajectory of your understanding on the subject. So, but I'm also, like I argued, even if the experts criticize my presentation, I'm not sure if they can make it simpler on a lighter note. If they did, they had their chance to, but they didn't. This is not all of you. This is not all you will need to know about macroeconomics. So you need to put that disclaimer so that tomorrow if you hear some indicators that were not mentioned here or some aspects of it, you won't say we weren't taught. No, that's not my objective. I can't do that in 45 minutes. It's a whole course in university. You can have a PhD in macroeconomics, right? Or aspects of macroeconomics. So, but we believe this is a good starting point to get you curious enough going forward. Right? Our objective is to get you curious enough. Number four, and concluding, this is not a macroeconomic presentation, even though I would talk about some of the predictions for next year. It is an attempt to teach you how to understand the several reports that will be released in this season and hopefully beyond. All right, so the agenda or discussion points the introduction I've just given, what is macroeconomics, important indicators, implications, Nigeria's scenario, and then what I call the final thoughts. All right, so let's get right into it. Now, why do we consider this topic very important? Macroeconomic realities are affecting you in your everyday life, and you'll find out shortly. So, why are the prices of things rising and so high? Right? Why is it hard to get a job in Nigeria? Why is the naira losing value? Did the Russian-Ukraine war affect the prices of Golden Morn in the supermarket? Or why did the Russian-Ukraine war affect the prices? These random questions are all related to macroeconomics. All right. So now you understand why this would be important. Now let's begin. And like I told you at the beginning of my presentation, my style is deliberately unique to help you understand the subject very well. And I'm going to lay down the foundation and take you through a journey of understanding. So please follow me. Now, observing and explaining the behavior and interactions between households, businesses, and governments. That is what I define as economics. So when you say, what is economics? Economics is how you explain the behavior and interactions between households, business, and governments. Now, why do poor people have more children than rich people? That's what economics will seek to answer. Are you following me? I'm sure you're following me. So that's an example of, so when you say, what is economics? Because I want to define it. Now, when we define economics, there are all kinds of definitions that confuse us. Listen, economics is how you observe and explain the behavior and interactions between households, businesses, and governments. Now, there is a popular definition that says how we manage scarce resources. Yes, scarce resources is one of them, but there's also a scenario where you have excess resources. So all of that, and that's why I asked, why do poor people have more children than rich people? That's an economic question. Of course, it also can be a sociology question. Let's now define micro versus macro. All right, I'm laying down some concepts. Please follow me. I'm establishing my basis so that when you come into these things, you'd understand. So I've defined economics. It's about three entities: households or individuals, businesses, and government. That's clear. 2, micro versus macro. So micro is focused on these entities I mentioned, households and businesses, right? That's what micro deals with. E.g., why factories like to use contract staff? Why do factories like to use contract staff? That's a micro question, and typically it can be deduced as such. The next one is macro, which is why we're here in the first place. But to help you understand and remember what macro is how everyone in the country is affected by everything else. I repeat, how everyone in the country is affected. So, for example, why the hijack rate? That's a macro conversation. It's not a micro conversation. All right. So I believe you are following me. What am I doing? Let me just take you back again so you remember, because I want you to really understand this. We're setting context. And the first thing we said when we began was, what is economics? Then micro versus macro. So that if you hear micro, you know what it is. And micro deals with households and businesses, their individual decisions and how they operate. So your own household budget is a micro conversation. Your company that makes bottled water, all their interactions in business, it's their own, as long as it's within that business, their productivity, how they increase cost, how they reduce cost, how they maximize profit, that is a micro conversation. And there are microeconomists that deal with that, usually consultants. But macroeconomic, on the other part, is how it affects everybody. And like I gave an example, why is there hijack rate? Is a macro conversation and not a micro. Now let's look at the last two. Monetary versus fiscal. You also see this a lot. Okay, so what's the difference? Monetary policy is how the central bank, which is an arm of the government or a government institution as it were, how it manages money to achieve set objectives, full stop. I repeat, monetary policy is, and in US it's Federal Reserve, here it is central bank. How they manage money, because everything, money is the store of value. The world would have been chaotic if there was no money. Imagine what would be the basis for which I would buy a laptop from somebody that when I make wood, so also when I make furniture. So I make furniture, I want to buy a laptop. What will I do? I will now go and do barter. What if he doesn't want wood? Then I have to go and look for someone who wants wood, change it to what he wants, and then give. No. So it's madness, right? So that's why money was created. Money is a store of value. That's where we reserve value. So if you have $2,000, that's a store of value that I can use to purchase anything that is worth $2,000. But the entity that is responsible for managing that is the central bank, and they manage the supply, right? How much we have of it and how less we have of it, which you find out why it's important through what they call monetary policy. Now, I don't want you to start getting confused, because that's the problem with, and my job here is to open your mind. So I repeat, monetary policy is how money, the supply of money is managed for certain objectives. And you will see the reason why when it comes to issues around inflation. If you remember what happened to Nigeria in the early part of the year when money was scarce, and you saw what we all went through, that's a classic example of the power of monetary policy, even though that one is at the very base level. Now, the fiscal, on the other part, is about government and how government generates and spends its money. So in other words, and I will now explain that in a moment. When government wants to intervene in the economy, they decide, okay, let's train youth. So they decide, okay, let's get companies that if any company would hire youth, we'll give them a discount. Or if a company wants to do any social responsibility, we'll give them a discount on their taxes. That's government intervening indirectly through what they call fiscal policy. All right, so one has to do with money solely, price stability. The second one, which is fiscal, has to do with government spending. Then lastly, geopolitics. Now, this is important because nations interact and try to protect their individual interests, which would impact global economies. So why is the West supporting Ukraine? That's a very important question. It's a geopolitical question, right? And that affects us, and I'll tell you how when we get to that point. Then lastly, of course, we need to pay attention to the news. That's when we understand geopolitics. So once again, I took us through definition of economics. I took us through monetary and fiscal policy. I took us through geopolitics. And I also took us through micro versus macroeconomics. All right? These are not exhaustive, by the way, but some of the most important things that I would like you to know I've highlighted. So take note in case you find others in future. So then, what is macroeconomics? All right, I believe you're all following me and we're making sense. We're making sense. So macroeconomics has to do with three key words in red. The first thing is there's an economy. What is an economy? To keep it simple again, economy is the wealth and resources of a country. Full stop. It's broadly the wealth and resources. Now, there could be additional things to that, but generally it has to do with that. E.g., all the goods and services produced or the population per time. Population is a resource. What are indicators, right? Indicators are signs and tools for measurements. So in other words, economic indicators are used to measure various parts of the economy. So remember I said, economy is the measure of wealth and resources. So if I will ask you on this call, Sweden and Nigeria, who is richer? Let's bring it home. You're dating two guys, and for some reason you've decided that the last decision you will use to determine who you're going to marry is, I'm talking to a lady now, is who is richer or who has a better prospect in the future. You need to measure that indicator. So you need an indicator to determine, okay, who is richer or wealthier, and on basis of that, make my decision. So what will you use? Would you say his salary? Would you say where he works? Would you say all of the above? That's what an indicator does. And I use this weird example so that you would not forget and you would always remember, all right? So indicators are tools for measurement. Please, this is important, and I know I'm not ready to say this yet. Indicators are not the causes themselves. And I think we need to understand that, and I'm sure we will. So they measure various parts. That means there's quite a significant amount of indicators that do exist, if I would put it that way. All right. Now, the last point is, the world has defined some generally accepted macroeconomic indicators. So, and that's why we hear, and that's what we hear in the news. And that's why I'm also here to tell us about what the world prioritizes as macroeconomic indicators. I believe you're following me. Macroeconomy has to do with how all of us are affected. So some context you should have in tracking macroeconomic indicators. Please, ladies and gentlemen, don't lose me. All right? I'm sure you're following my chain of thought. For those of you who joined, we started and we're still defining macroeconomics, okay? And I'm trying to give you, I've defined it. I said it's how all of us are affected. So if Nigerians are jackpotting too much, it's a macroeconomic problem. Insecurity is a macroeconomic problem because it deals with all of us, right? Our population is a macroeconomic conversation. Our GDP, fine, and so on and so forth. Now, some context you should have in tracking macroeconomic indicators. Number one, the type of economy. Macroeconomic indicators in advanced economies the priorities they put are different from the priorities that we put in emerging economies or developing economies. Okay, emerging economies like Turkey, they're called emerging economies. Nigeria, I haven't checked lately, but I think sometimes we're referred to as emerging, depending on what context. But generally, we consider ourselves as developing, even though they say we should have outgrown that. And I'll check. You can also do that research. Secondly, the institutions tracking the macroeconomic indicators. So the most popular are IMF, the World Bank. I use IMF a lot in my own research. Then we have local ones like Central Bank, Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, Budget Office, which most times they share depending on what. I don't expect the Budget Office to mention anything fiscal, so anything monetary without talking to the Central Bank or pulling from Central Bank figures, because Central Bank is in charge of monetary, if you remember, while Budget Office is in charge of revenue and collection. Well, not Budget Office, sorry, Ministry of Finance, which is responsible for revenue and spending. So for those of you who just came in, fiscal is government spending, how government spends money. Monetary is how this government regulates the supply of money, because money is important. The third part of our context is scale or reach. There is global, there is regional, and there's country conversations around macroeconomics. Please pay attention to that. If there's a regional problem or a regional opportunity, just like the AFTA, African Free Trade Agreement, that is a regional conversation and it benefits us. So some of you, your companies are going to be producing to take advantage of the AFTA agreement because it's a regional conversation. And if AFTA as a bloc decides to do trade or do business with, well, I don't know if that can work, but like a European Union or a United Kingdom or China, then those are regional collaborations, as it were, as it relates to the economy. Then there's global. Global is how the advanced economies are making decisions that affect us. For instance, if they raise their interest rates, and you'll find out what that means, it affects us, and you'll find out why. The last thing is what I call emerging options. And this is my own proprietary definition, where likes of the World Economic Forum, now they are tracking newer indicators, things like the kind of jobs that will be relevant in the future, what is important now, emerging conversations that are macro in nature, and so on and so forth. So once again, these are the fundamentals that I would like you to remember in dealing with macroeconomics. There's the type of economy, advanced versus emerging. There is the institutional tracking, IMF, and so on and so forth. IMF is a good one for global indicators. It's always good to stay consistent. They have a fantastic platform that gives information, as it were. Scale and reach, remember there's global, regional, and country, and you'll see that shortly. And then emerging, World Economic Forum. There are other ones too out there, but World Economic Forum is the one I would like to cite for now. All right, now here's the most important point, and I think this is the reason why we're here today. All the indicators can be Googled and can be read. Remember that. So there's no need for you to be on this call. What I came to do today is to help you connect the dots so that you finally can think for yourself on the subject. Indicators are derived and are not causes. So, for instance, geography is important in macroeconomics. We have global, regional, and national macroeconomic drivers and indicators. So if US raises its interest rates, it affects us in Nigeria. So let me quickly answer that. What are interest rates? Interest rates are set by the central bank. Interest rates is the rate at which companies can borrow. All right? Or sorry, it's the rate at which banks set for borrowing. So if they put a benchmark of, let's say, 10%, that is the benchmark. So banks now say, we'll lend you at, for instance, 15%, because the benchmark is 10%. So when you come to collect, the cost of borrowing is added to that interest rate. I'm just giving you very basic definitions. Now, why is that important? If the interest rates are high, right, you know what's going to happen. And it also affects the cost of placing money. People that would have typically brought money to Nigeria, because there's what we call portfolio investors. Portfolio investors come and invest in our stock market. So they don't have any operation. They just come, buy X unit of this shares, X unit of that shares, and they clean out. So what happens is, or they trade. So what happens is, if the interest rates are raised in their country, means they can get better returns for their money. You know what they do? They run back to their country and go and put their money there. I'm talking about fund managers now, as it were. But there's another scenario where if the interest rates are raised, we that borrowed money from developed countries, please follow me here. You know what happens? The rate now affects us. So for those of you who are familiar with taking loans from banks, they will tell you that these rates are not fixed. Something can happen. So all of us will just wake up one morning and tell you, please, your interest rate that you're servicing every month has now increased. Therefore, your debt will cost you more. Now, when your debt is almost 10 trillion, and depending on where you got that debt from, you can imagine the implication if you don't service your debt. So that's how interest rates affect us. If they increase the interest rates in the West, right, in those financial markets, when we borrow money from them, our cost of servicing that debt would increase. Why do they increase interest rates? They increase interest rates when their inflation is high. Okay, now I know this is when you start losing me. Please do not lose me. If you lose me here, then there's no point, right? And that's why I came here, to make it simple. I will come back and connect the dots, so please follow me, all right? Interest rates is set by the central bank and is set to regulate money supply, because banks are the ones that are custodians of that money, all right? Number two, and I'll come back to that point. Please follow me. Indicators are symptoms and are not the causes or the drivers, which I've already indicated. So what do I mean? Russia's invasion of Ukraine is one of the major reasons, if not the most important reason, for the rise in energy and food prices. So all the craze in our supermarkets and the markets that things are 3 times now is because of that war. Why? Because they broke global supply chain. How? They make up the most of grain. They make up most of the grains that we are now consuming. So wheat, what if you check Golden Morn, wheat, baby food, and so on and so forth. That ingredient is grain, is wheat. Wheat is used for so many things. I think wheat is also used to make saccharin or sugar. Sorry, to make one of these sweeteners. It depends, even though there are other alternatives in Nigeria that we can explore, like sorghum, I think, or thereabout. I can't really remember, but I don't want to get into that. Even cassava in some cases. But here is the point: wheat, they are the 2 biggest. They control the market in the world, and Africans, because we import a lot of that, it now went ahead to affect us. Also, COVID, we're just recovering from COVID, where because of what happened, global shipping lines and transatlantic, all of that was slowed down, prices went up, all of that, right? That problem, we all are just recovering from it. Then Russia now invaded Ukraine to compound the problem for us. So that was what broke the global supply chain. So things now became more expensive because Russia put a blockade on Ukraine's grains. So Ukraine could not exit. So Turkey came and negotiated and brokered. I think Turkey, one of the other countries, said, okay, you know what, guys, you guys are fighting. And the brokering is very important. If there's someone in this call and your family people are fighting, brokering helps. So they brokered the deal, but unfortunately, it didn't work out. Well, it worked out briefly. Then Russia now reneged on it. I don't know where Russia is on it. I haven't listened to news in a while, but that was the last thing that happened. Now, the third one is, even though it creates opportunities for our own farmers, because Nigeria can produce wheat, it's just that we don't produce wheat at the economies of scale. We don't produce wheat at the economies that will make sense and will enable us to compete. So we produce our own wheat and it will be too expensive to export. Now you're seeing the thing is coming together. Because their own wheat, over time, they've known how to maximize yield, where you can predict that for every hectare, I can get XYZ returns per hectare, right? But in this case, when you're producing at a lower output, you cannot compete with the developed clouds, right? The third one is all the causes or drivers are in the news. Now, I know a lot of us have been told not to listen to the news because it's depressing. Unfortunately, the news may be depressing, but it is the only way you will know what will trigger the next global issue, right? Or will create opportunity for your business, employer, or even pose a threat. So if all the time that Russia was preparing to invade Ukraine, if you had listened to the analysts, you would have heard the implication of food prices. So of course, there's something you could have done because it's a global issue, but at least that will help you understand what to do. And for a praying nation, that will be a better way to pray. At least you're more accurate of what you need to do. All right. So these are important facts. And this is the main reason why I'm spending time on this presentation, because all the other macroeconomic indicators that I will introduce to you, you can read them and understand it. But the problem is if you don't know the purpose, which is what I'm explaining, and the drivers, then it doesn't make any sense. And this is designed for simple explanation. It's not to impress business analysts. If you're a business analyst here, this position will not be very useful to you because you're supposed to be more advanced than this, all right? This is for ordinary people who just need to know things better. All right, so the indicators are a lot because we're about to get into them and can be very confusing. So the hack is to be diligent reader and curious when you hear macroeconomic terms. My job is to raise your curiosity. Number 3, remember the subject and indicators were invented by humans like you and I, so you too can understand it. I think that's supposed to help someone see that, you know what, if a human being created these terms, I think I can understand it. So don't feel like they are heavenly languages, right? Or from hell. Now, the last one is you can create your own indicators or your own indicator as long as you have the logic and the data to back it. However, we have the non-negotiables for global uniformity, all right? That is, of course, you can't really create yours. I mean, who's going to give you the license to, and who are you going to be reporting that to? I mean, are you going to go around the whole country to measure it? Do you have the resources to do that? No. But maybe when you become the DG of the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, you can now at that point say, you know what, why don't we measure this or why don't we measure that? And you reference this class that you were in one day. Now, quick hack. The best way to navigate anything, because we're about to go into the list, with too much information is to establish category structure and logic that binds it all together. Okay, man, what do you mean? The best way to understand something that has too many details and they're just everywhere is to find the connections and the relationships between them. Now, I'll give you the example very quickly so that you see what I mean. So look at this. I picked the top 12, the most common. Gross domestic product, gross domestic product growth rates, GDP per capita, population growth, unemployment rate, current account to GDP, inflation, government budget, consumer confidence index, interest rates, industrial production growth, balance of trade, and so on and so forth. Now, GDP alone, there are 3 or 4 methods or 3 or 4 types of GDP indicators. There's GDP, PPP, price. Now, I don't want to start. My job is not to confuse you, and I want to stick to the script. The script is context. So if I've showed you 12, which you can go on AI, go online, research, and on your own determine what they are, and their definitions are there, and then further research what they mean, you are fine. So, and this is important for those of you who do a lot of teaching, and this is my recommendation. When you teach, you should not try to force information into people's throats, like somebody would have been tempted to do by defining everything here. There's no point. They can read it up. But what you want to do is, how does this all make sense? And that's what I'm about to show you. So follow my standard analogy. Organizing the ideas, and you're going to get used to this because I'll do this very often. So typically, if you look at an office, this is what you have in an office: desks, Adobe software, scanners, Flash, and software. Adobe was popular at the time this presentation was created in 2011, this particular slide. So look at this, what you can see here, and look at this. Now, I want to give you 30 seconds to appreciate this. Some of you already get it. This is what you call verbal reasoning or quantitative reasoning or logic. Inanimate things, furniture, computer, hardware, software. And you can see all the things on the furniture. You can see all the things on the computer hardware and all the things on the software. All right? Great. Now, once you identify the logic or structure, go ahead and make your infinite list. So in other words, when you see this, the problem with this is the way it's arranged, right? It's everywhere. So what's the usual population, inflation, like it's too much to track. And that's where people switch off. But once you are able to identify everything and put it where they belong, like this, then it becomes clearer. Now, here is the issue. Most of the experts, right, do not usually take the time to put things for us like this on any subject. And that's where people always miss it. And that's what affected us when we're learning mathematics in school. We usually were only told, we were presented the information with the information like this. So the teacher comes, he gives us one example. The next thing, he gives us a test, classwork, and then he stops there. Guess what? Exam shows up and he gives you something. And like, they didn't give us. But I don't know whether that happened to you guys. They didn't teach us. Some people will pass. Oh, how did you know? Apparently, they went and researched outside the scope of what the teacher taught and found that extra example. Meanwhile, all the teacher needed to tell us is that, hey, quadratic equations, there are only 3 categories: furniture, computer hardware. So in other words, if you know all the examples under furniture, you are fine. If you know, but he will tell us only furniture and hardware and not tell us there's something called. So when you're able to show any complicated thing to look like this, government, economics, social, people will get it. Structure. So now here is the point. I did not find any suitable categorization as at the time of my research. There were things like lagging indicators, leading indicators. The context is different. So what I decided to do was, I said, you know what, I will put them under 3 categories. There is stuff related to economics, there is stuff related to government finance, and there's stuff related to what I call subjective priorities. Emmanuel, how did you come up with this? Now, one of the things you learn in Kryptr when we teach critical thinking is we try to explain that once you have the ability to think, you can define the logic yourself. And I gave you guys a hack today. I told you that every knowledge and understanding we have in the world today was created by humans. And if it was humans like you and I, the only reason why they have authority to tell you that you should believe what they're saying is because they were able to establish the logic, either using research or with theories that they've proven over time. So when Michael Porter tells you the 5 forces, he's telling you his own theory, even though he has data to back it up to explain after observing. So if you look at a certain situation in your office, you can create your own theory if you can establish the logic. So Emmanuel, what was your logic? How did you arrive at these 3 headers? I arrived at these 3 headers because economic is economic. It's something that is not within the control of government. The second one is government. Government is the biggest economic determinant, political or bureaucratic, meaning civil service. So if government is, so I needed to give government its own category through the central bank, through its fiscal policy, how it spends its money, how it collects taxes. Then the third one is what I call subjective priorities. Subjective priorities, I had to come up with that to say, this may not exactly be government or economic, or they could be either, but it has to do with items that are important to that entity at that time. So in the US, for instance, consumer confidence is big deal. Retail spending is very important information. We're in December now. They're going to be tracking their retail spending. Why is their retail spending important? Their retail spending is important because they are large economies. Now, this is my opinion. Please follow me. You're going to see some interesting logic. Their economies are retail spending is a trigger across various chains. When consumers spend, more things need to be produced to replenish. So companies go back to production. Logistics is there. Banks benefit. Government, more revenue from profits, and so on and so forth. So it's as long as people are spending, that spending sends these activities into motion, and it builds economic activity, right? Also, for countries like UK, they have a very huge tourists. They have very huge tourists coming to the country, and those tourists need to come in and shop, and that shopping, does help the economy. To those businesses, those local businesses. So as businesses are doing well, people are buying coffee, people are hanging out, people are eating at fast foods, and it just is a beehive of activity. Just remember your university campus and the environment around it. The economy activity that was created there is what happens when retail is booming. But when retail slows down, it's a terrible thing. It's borderline, recession, as it were, or even depression. It's always a bad sign. So that's how I categorized it. Now, if you become very good at this after learning from here, and you go and create your own classification that you can justify, feel free. All right. So here's the list right under it. We have, and I'm going to just bring it all at once. Like I said, so for economy, we have GDP, inflation, unemployment, stock market, balance of trade. These are all things around economic. Even the stock market, someone who sits, it can't sit on a government, but it's usually a subjective priority, in my opinion. Then we have government revenue, government spending, current account to GDP, interest rates, government debt. Nigeria's debt is over 80 trillion naira. Over 80 trillion naira. Put that in perspective, all right? Then we have subjective. Subjective, there are things like stock market, consumer spending, industrial growth, private debt to GDP, consumer confidence, blah, blah, blah. It's a list. It's endless. What I'm teaching you here is the logic, all right? Follow me. Now, globally, now we've started to settle down. There are 2 indicators that I want you to leave this room with. At least start from here. Thing about knowledge is don't shove it off your throat in 45 minutes. I'm not going to do that. So I want to teach you how to navigate your way. And let me give you 2. Economic growth and inflation. Now, this is the one I believe a lot of you will learn today. Economic growth reflects the growth in the quality and quantity of goods and services produced in a country. What does that mean? All of us on this call all work for a living. If I were to calculate the GDP of all of us on this call, 29 of us, say, okay, everybody's salaries add it up. And it adds up to, let's say, 25 million. So I would say, now this is not the perfect example, but it's to help you appreciate the GDP of the people on this phone call is 25 million naira. Well, it will be more probably. Let's say 45 million naira. All right? That's an example of when we say economic growth. So GDP, gross domestic product, all the goods and services that are produced in a country. All right? So, and of course, there are different methods and then subcategories, and you'll read all that when the time comes. Now, I just want you to explain that has to do with economic activity. Now, Nigeria is projected to grow at just about 3%, depending on whose report you believe. IMF says about 3.1, they're about 3.2. And I think the president said about 3.7 in his budget presentation, or thereabout. But it doesn't really matter, they're all within the 3% range. So, GDP growth is the growth in the number of goods and services, or the volume of goods and services, the value of goods and services, I beg your pardon, the value of goods and services that are produced in a year. So if this year the value was 500 billion, and then we grew by 3%, it indicates growth. And you'll see the reason shortly and why it's important. So it's growth in the production of goods and services, the value of goods and services. Inflation, on the other part, tracks changes in prices of goods and services. Golden Morn was 1.5, now it's 1.7 or 2K, 2.5 prices. Of course, that's just food, but across different products, and there are of course different indicators and different categories of inflation inflation rates to measure, right? But the key thing is that for a developing country like us, between 7 and 11% is the healthy zone. Anything above it begins to slow down rates, slow down growth, and I'll show you the relationship. So it affects us. You're like, okay, what do you mean? But our inflation is over 20%. Yes, Nigeria's inflation hit 27%. Meanwhile, the safe zone is 7 and 11. Developed countries, they're talking below 7. Now, when the world Ukraine war started, it has hit double digits. Some of them were in the 10, 12, 14, 15, 16 range. And that made them increase interest rates. Now you remember? So there is too much money in circulation, right? Because inflation is a reflection of the rising prices. So if prices go up, too much money has to be pushed in to follow those prices. So you remember your last supermarket experience. Everything has driven up, has gone up. So you have more money in circulation. So you know what they do? They increase interest rates to reduce the money in circulation. Say, how does that work? Well, the way it works is when they increase interest rates, borrowing increases. There is also yields on investments that makes people, say, okay, no problem. Instead of giving money to consumers, let's put the money, let's go and buy government bonds, or let's conserve money. But the bigger part is that it makes borrowing expensive. So companies reduce, so companies that borrow will not borrow. Banks, so everybody, no, I can't borrow. The rate is too high, blah, blah, blah. So that withdrawal of cash from the system it also now creates another bad effect, which is that, okay, people are not borrowing, people are not investing. So you see there's a cyclical effect that I'll talk about shortly, which likes of Milton Friedman, where, had discussed, which you should shortly. So once again, because this is where it begins to get a little complicated, and that's where people lose and switch off. Economic growth, now you remember GDP growth. It is the growth in the value of goods and services produced in a country. Productivity. Inflation, on the other part, is the prices, right, of goods and services, and the changes in prices. And Nigeria's case was so bad, and everybody felt it, even though it was triggered by the recovery from COVID that we're already trying to recover from, Russia-Ukraine disruption of value chain, or the value chain, global supply value chain, and then we now remove subsidy. And when you thought that was just enough, you saw what happened to our naira and all the dependency that we have on importation of goods and services. So you're beginning to see how that was triggered, and how that triggered the rising cost of goods and services. All right, let's carry on. So, why is sustained economic growth important? Please, this is where you need to understand. It leads to higher standards of living, higher consumptions of goods and services that improve the quality of their life. So you remember what I said GDP growth is increase in the number of goods and services, the quantity and quality of the value, I beg your pardon, of goods and services. So, but that's a reflection of the fact that means people are producing new stuff. So because your productivity has increased, you guys are making things the country is making things that benefit people. So people's quality of living can increase. So people can now, do less they can do more with less. They built, my friend was telling me that they bought a vacuum cleaner now that cleans their houses using It's a robot. You just program it and it goes around the house and it cleans it up. So by morning, it has cleaned the house. Or dishwasher. Those are all goods and services that are out of productivity. I'm sure some of you are already connecting the dots. You now see why we have a productivity problem. So once it's made in the country, let's not talk about the jobs it creates, which is number 4, because you need more people to create that. But it is the fact that people now have a higher standard of living. So instead of you sweeping your house for 1 hour, you program your robot and go and sleep. You can now focus on more important things. That's standard of living. Secondly, increase government revenues. Government can increase taxes. Why? Because companies are making more money. So instead of borrowing, they increase their taxes and they can use it to finance their budget. Now, if they don't borrow and they get more taxes, they can now say, let's build a train from Lagos to Maiduguri because we have extra cash. Well, let's build a train. We have money. We didn't borrow it. Or let's build a train from Victoria Island to Ajah using Babbage. That is because there is money. So that is how it happens. How did they get the money? They got the money because companies produced more, made more money, and then they taxed them. The third one is increase investments and innovation. Because there's so much money now, people have chopped belly food. They can now start thinking, okay, let's go to Mars. Or let's take some time. So they start to think of things that are a bit, innovation comes in, and you can invest. You can now say, let me go and look for one drug that human beings can take and they won't sleep and they won't be tired. To give them the same energy they would have gotten when they slept. I beg your pardon. You only have that kind of thinking when you've eaten. And that's after you finish producing it and you want to now. And there's too much money. So okay, let's invest. That's what it creates what I call a multiplier effect. To him that has more is given, and to the one that does not have, like developing countries, even the little they have is taken away from them. The last point, it creates more jobs. Companies will need to hire more people because there's more work, there's more demand. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention is that the main trigger for economic growth, right, is demand. And demand is triggered by 2 things. Internal demand, that is a growth of your population that has purchasing power, and the thing that gives them purchasing power is foreign direct investments, right? One of the ways, or trade. So when China says, I want XYZ tons of cassava, that demand that is triggered will require companies that make cassava and everybody in the value chain to quickly adjust because demand has come. So global trade helps, or investors coming to invest here because they see we have a large population. So they'll build a factory, produce, sell to us, or export and repatriate their money. I'm sure you're seeing the connection now, but it's all driven by demand. Let's look at inflation. On the other hand, for inflation is bad. High inflation is bad because it decreases purchasing power. Why? Now that, okay, look at me now. I'm using iPhone 12. Ideally, all things being equal, I should have maybe moved to 15 by now. I mean, I'm not saying I'm that, but you get my point. But the price is too high. So I'm waiting, right? And I'll come back to this iPhone 12 matter. Now, I'm using iPhone 12. For some people, it is how much meat they eat or the cereal they buy. They used to buy Kellogg. Now they're buying, I don't want to mention names. Do you get what I mean? So decrease in consumer spending and purchasing power. The second one is it increases the production cost. So if things are high, so companies, all the inputs, if you sell plantain, your plantain price increases. And, it reduces your production, how much you can produce. Or if you cannot transfer to the customer, because customer cannot afford it, they will not buy, depending on what you make. If you make a luxury good, customers say, you can keep your stock. I'll go and drink water. You understand? Especially if you're making something that people will have an option for. So what happens there, it reduces your it reduces the investment to grow production. So companies cannot now invest in more infrastructure more equipment to expand, and their revenues drop, their profits drop, and they now start laying off people because there's no demand to sustain. No, that there's no demand. Sorry, things are too expensive, and because things are expensive, we're not spending money. All right. So higher interest rates, on the other hand, okay, someone is raising their hand. I don't know if she wants to say anything, or that was an error. Higher interest rates. Okay, I'll take it as an error. Higher interest rates on the other part. So inflation is high. Why does it lead to high interest rates? Remember, don't lose me here. I give you the reason, but let me say it. Government, don't forget, the way it fights inflation is to increase interest rates. You remember? I told you that. So when they go ahead to increase interest rates, what happens? They increase the cost of borrowing. And when they increase the cost of borrowing, companies will now not borrow to invest. So when your company would have taken money to get you guys a staff bus or to buy more equipment lines, they will not do that because the cost of, it's gone too high. And so they withdraw. That affects companies, affects growth, affects the ability to produce more, hire more people to do the production, and that leads to, as it were, unemployment. But here is the thing: uncertainty. Let me give you this one. I'm waiting for the price of phone to drop, so I refuse to buy. That uncertainty and waiting suspends everybody. So most people have withdrawn. They're like, we're waiting for Christmas. Maybe the TV will now cost 160K. What if it doesn't now cost 160K? Everybody loses. You didn't buy. The people that were supposed to make the money off you didn't also buy. You didn't also sell. That's what it means, that waiting for prices to come lower, which keeps people from spending. All right. So that's how inflation works. And I just gave you four indicators. But yeah, I'm sure you need to, okay, now I understand my economics. Now, the problem is, you'll be wondering, is it my own refusal to buy iPhone that is going to be the problem? No. But think about it at a macro level. So for somebody, it is phone. For somebody else, it is cereal. For somebody, and when it begins to add up, 200 million people, I think you are beginning to see the point. All right. That is, what we mean by macroeconomy and how inflation affects it. Now, let me bring it home because we're going to start tying this up. All right. I know my time is up. I just request for another 10 minutes to put this together. All right. Now, how does it work? And I hope you're enjoying yourself. How does it work? This is the way it works in the real world. Look at this. Please follow me. Unemployment. Is it high, low, or concerning? If it is high, it leads to high crime rates, making it difficult for investors to bring their money to set up businesses, right? So there's a lot of insecurity. And then that now gives government to now intervene. Government now decide, let me lower the cost of borrowing for companies to enable them to access cheap credit to expand production and hire more people. These are very simplistic examples. The government would need more than just this policy. They would need a ton of things. Together, it now leads to a result. What is the result? People start getting jobs, and in the process, start spending their money. So there are more people, and then when they spend their money, it creates more jobs. Let me explain something to us. Do you know, if 1 million jobs are created in Lagos, Lagos will feel the pressure. Are you aware? This is a digression. What do you mean by that? Think about 1 million people who now earn 100,000 naira plus. All the houses we have to build for them, all the transportation that they have to enter. I see people standing on the road these days. I don't know why. All the food they have to buy, all the supermarkets, 1 million more people, and boom. So we're generally a low-income country. A lot of the people don't have high purchasing power. Very few rich people spend in value, not volumes. So that's why. But the moment, so that means I'm just giving someone a hint now. This will benefit someone in future. When Nigeria's economic indicators or Nigeria's economy begins to grow, the kind of opportunities we will see, we have not seen before. If you think we have enough schools, it's going to double, triple. If you think we have enough houses, you've never seen anything. If you think we have enough cars, there will be so much pressure on the infrastructure and the resources because people don't have money to spend. So that will now force ShopRite to expand, this Domino's to double down because there are more people with more money. That's what they want to call it. That's why people rush to Lagos, because you can be in Lagos and not stand outside and pack someone in front of your street and collect 500 naira. That's lunch for the day, or lunch and dinner. That is where there's economic activity. But when in areas where there's no economic activity, well, all they can see is just hopelessness. Then that now makes them angry. And they now decide to do things they're not supposed to do, like it happened in insecurity. So that is why this concept of macroeconomics is very important. And the reason why we're having this conversation for some of you will now develop interest in economics. Because you know what? In developed climes, somebody's responsibility in more sophisticated, we have a challenge with managing our economy. There are different reasons. There's political interferences. There is lack of sincerity on the part of the leaders. So we say and all that, depending on which leader you're talking about, which leaders you're talking about, which is not really the cause of today. But here is the problem. We're not even managing the economy well. And that's why we got ourselves in this mess. The idea is some of us on this call will be inspired to develop interest, because everybody wants to be in the creative space, wants to be a content creator. Who are the economists who will say, you know what, I'm just going to only take one indicator, one aspect of an indication. So under inflation, there are maybe 5 things I mentioned. You pick one. Higher interest rates or uncertainty. And your job is to increase certainty by disseminating some type of information. Now, you remember this, what I define economics as? How we observe and, the interactions of people, interaction of people and businesses. You have seen the connection now. So your job is, I want to work on uncertainty. I want to make sure that Nigerians, when inflation is going high, do not withhold spending, because they need to spend, right? So when they spend, they create demand for businesses. Those businesses now need to hire more people, make more profits, pay more government revenues. But when they withhold because prices are going up, right? So you go and partner with businesses and say, advertise to people that, listen, my price is not going to change. So therefore, you better come and buy now anyway. Or force people to do discount and say, okay, I'll come and do discount. Now, this is economic managers. And I believe I'm inspiring somebody on the call to understand the value of economics. We don't have depth in economics, right? I'm going off script, but follow me. In economics. So this is why we're teaching people. The few people that are in, there are very few. And anybody else is too complicated, I don't understand it. Now you're seeing the implications that you can be a macroeconomic, you can work for governments, state governments, local governments, and contribute to the decision that affects our collective good, just like I've told you. All right, look at the other example. How does it affect your employer? Macroeconomic, let's take inflation. High inflation will lead to lower purchasing power of employees. So employees, then they now start putting pressure on employer. Okay, I'll increase salary, or we'll go increase salary. Employer immediately takes the hit. So if the employer cannot match it, he suffers an exodus. So what happens is, of course, government intervenes, which in some cases, to reduce money is supplying money. Do you notice, have you been told, or are you aware that the naira is getting scarcer? Maybe some of you don't know. They're trying to reduce inflation by pulling back the naira, by reducing it in circulation. Not the one that happened in January, February, or I think they are earlier in the year. I'm talking about the one that is happening now. And the reason is to reduce the money in supply and increase interest rates. But we have a unique situation in the country that we cannot increase interest rates, because they're already, we have increased interest rates, but there's a gap between our interest rates and inflation. The gap is too wide. Inflation is 27%, over 20%. And inflation is at that rate. At what point do you want to keep inflation? Now, I know what I'm saying sounds technical, so I'm not going to bother trying to explain it because you lose me. But what I want to explain is that there are now interrelationships. That's why I said we need economic management. Anyway, at the end of the day, we have a result. That's what I call a chicken and egg. Now, here is the thing. Don't miss me here. Somebody's going to be inspired to change their career path. The result is that, okay, I want to increase the money supply. So there is when you're trying to find a radio station, okay, you guys didn't do that growing up. Some of you didn't do that. You are trying to tune it. There's a tuning, you keep tuning. So you'll be increasing the rates, watching carefully. Now, if you increase it too much, businesses we told that don't borrow, they don't invest, they don't hire more people, you've caused problem. So there is that gradual measure of achieving a perfect number or perfect scenario. Milton Friedman, one of the finest economists of all time, and let me inspire some people. When you think about economists, right, people think it's boring. It's actually very fancy. Milton Friedman was among the people that designed, the stories I know because I have a couple of books about him, the genius around America's economy. Of course, America has issues in economic, debt and all of that. But in terms of how they created these policies where they say, every American should own a home, or you can buy a car. So car companies now thrive. People now work for so there's now large production plants. That decision. So when you have a country that has a high population like Nigeria and a lot of poor people, you're not quick to do AI or to do machines. No, you get people to do more labor because you need to engage them. So you create, or you make them you increase their skill so that they can do more sophisticated stuff. Or you find a balance. And this is the job of the economists. All right, so that alignment is what would help to achieve the results that you are. All right. Now look at, I'm concluding now. Let me bring it home. Here is the point you need to know. Russia and Ukraine war triggered global supply shortage, which I explained. So the world slowed down economic growth. The world was growing at 5%. It went to 3.1% in 2022 and further down to 2.2 in 2023. Have you seen the problem? Now that you understand the meaning, 5 to half of it, that was bad. So it slowed things down. That's how it affected all of us. Then that now triggered inflation. What triggered inflation was, all the things that I mentioned, supply chain and all that. So that now resulted in, please follow me, debt burdens. Don't forget we borrowed money. So because we borrowed money, they increased their interest rates. Our cost of debt now increased. We that were servicing our debt because they increased their interest rates. So if you notice, and I may be wrong, our president has been globetrotting with other countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia. Why are they going to look for money there? Because those ones will give them under a different term and condition, right? Not the one that they got from the West. Or they can do some kind of partnership. Come and build a pipeline for me. That is, so I'm beginning to show you how the news is connecting to this reality. So when you see the president going to Saudi Arabia it's not a religious conversation, it's an economic conversation. I know some of you are like, are you serious? Yeah, I'm showing you the connection, right? It's because those guys will give him money. I mean, Saudi Arabia, do you know what Saudi Arabia has in oil? And their production is not even slowing down. They're still stealing your own oil. So you can understand the dynamics. Anyway, so all of this led to interest rates to spike, which you can see on the right, number 3. So as the Fed increased their price, borrowing costs increased, higher interest rates discouraging borrowing of investment. So when we don't borrow, we don't invest. And then those rates affect savings and yields because, hey, people would like to put their money away. So when you start seeing things like this, another slide, key thing is trends. So look at 2021 across regions. Emerging. Remember what I told you about regions, right? Emerging Europe, Latin America, Middle East. Don't worry. This is how you'll be seen. And now you know how to, I'm showing you how to read them. Check all their growth rates, right? What is the most important thing? The indicators for inflation were not looking good. As far back as 2021, inflation was pretty low until things went as it were. All right, and then same thing here. Now for Nigeria, which is my conclusion, we have other things we measure: interest rates, inflation, forex exchange, oil prices, foreign investment, unemployment. Is fine. I've taught you from the beginning about structure. Now you know when you see inflation, okay, look at inflation, 27%. You know the implication, right? Remember what I told you? When you see MPR, what's MPR? So MPR is monthly, monthly policy rate, I beg your pardon. So look at it, 18.7. Now that's the benchmark they set, so that either for borrowing 12.1% or for lending. So remember when they set it, banks now add their own, or there's a difference, and then it now hits you, the borrower, whether business or whatever. So that rate is set by them, and they set it to control inflation, right? To control money supply. Remember, money supply controls inflation. So you've seen the connection. Oil prices, why it's important? Because all our revenue is in oil or government revenue. So government sets a benchmark of 92, and the Q3 was $92 per barrel. And then when we sell more oil at higher price, we make more money, service our debt, build new roads, and do other things. So these are the macroeconomics that impact Nigeria and are important. Now, there are other things also I wanted to add, like government debt, 87 trillion naira in debt. That's all like, wow, that's high. Well, and this is it, we'll learn that in business analysis. What is the relationship between that amount and our GDP? Don't forget, national debt is a percentage of how much we produce and tax. So they said it's still within the safe zone, but it is actually concerning because our revenue is not high enough to service our debt, all our debt, at least. And so it's a bit of a problem. And I think I'm speaking to lay people here, so I wouldn't go into. But anyway, revenue at that time was about 10.3, 10.9, 10.4 trillion. And look at inflation, and look at economic growth. So you can see where all the thing is going. Now, there was a time that Nigeria's economic growth was 7-8%. 2000, 2003. I mean, things were booming. Now you see things more like this, right? Look at this. Real GDP growth rate. Look at the different regions. The world. There's always the world. There's emerging markets. So if you're a business analyst on the call, you always learn to compare a benchmark. Don't just throw figures. You have to compare the benchmark. So the world look at where everything is. But you have United States. United States is always isolated because it's the most powerful economy. And they raise interest rates. Europe too is also is an important block. But this growth rate is showing that if they are doing well, then they will buy more goods from us in Africa, or more demand, or that's the connection. But inflation also is over there. If they increase their interest rates, you remember what I told you? You know what it does. So that's the list. Look at our own interest rates. Sorry, our own inflation rates, I beg your pardon. You can see Sub-Saharan Africa is the highest on the list, followed by Middle East and Central. But sometimes some people have high inflation, but they also have high productivity. Anyway, but all of these things that I mentioned, I already said, and I explained them. Now, for 2024, this is what we have. This is our budget: 18 trillion in revenue. The budget is 27 trillion. We're targeting a revenue of 18 trillion, and a physical debt. We're going to go and borrow 9.1 trillion to fund that debt, so that together it adds up to 27. Right? Oil prices, we're benchmark at 77. It's currently at about 90 something. I think the last time I checked. And then we're targeting to produce 1.7 million, 0.87 million. Now Nigeria at its peak usually does 2.2, 2.1. So because of the oil theft and all that, now you're seeing the connection. So that 1.7 times the oil price gives you the value we produce. So if you do the math, you know how much they will generate. But the problem is, some of the oil has already been, the oil fields are drying out, so they're not producing that much. You need to spend money to build more infrastructure so that you can go deeper into the oil that are drying up and pull out more oil and sell. Some of the contracts are ratios. Chevron takes a bigger percent or a different percentage, Nigeria takes a percentage because you don't have your own. It's complicated. And now you're seeing how, and then when you pack it out, someone else steals it. That's how your revenue begins to drop. All right. Now, I've showed you guys this before. You need to pay attention to the news now. And I've recommended, and they're not paying me for this, right? Stairs, Arise. These are your two best. I like them a lot. The Arise has a business segment. If you go on YouTube, you can follow and read the drivers. It will open your mind. So you see connection. Dangote Refinery now is a macroeconomic conversation at this point. That's why everyone is excited, because it will have to do with our oil, our cost of gasoline, hopefully drive it down, our demand for Forex. Then there are the other ones that you track for global, right? CNN, BBC. But I have what I call luxury news: Time, Bloomberg, Newsweek, Economist. Those ones that are much deeper. Maybe somebody analyzing whether Russia-Ukraine war will ever end. Those and why to end. They go and bring the most sophisticated whatever on that, and he gives analysis. He spent 20 years researching Ukraine or Russia or studying Putin, and they paid him to come and talk. He will tell you when Putin's mood swings and when to end and to stop the war. That's where you get that kind of sophisticated news on those parts, especially The Economist. But that is how you build your capability. And all these things I'm saying, here is my conclusion. A lot of us are hoping and aspiring to become important people someday. But if you don't understand macroeconomics, you're sitting down in a company you're sitting down, you're saying you're the CEO of a bank. If you don't understand macroeconomics, you're going to make wrong decisions. Of course, you may follow the bandwagon, but you may not understand how to make strategic decisions because you don't understand the fundamentals. So there are indicators that people would see. Heather, farmers are now migrating to Osun State from Zaria. And you're like, what's the implication? If you plot one or two together, you can say, this is the implication. Let's open more branches here. Let's do this. These are the things that happen when you understand. All right. So my conclusion and advice: follow the news and track geopolitical issues. Local news, international news. Second, do further research and use AI to ask 7-year-old questions. What do I mean by that? Hey, AI, please, why does inflation, tell me how rising inflation would affect this. It will answer you. Okay, explain it to a 7-year-old, and so on and so forth. And then lastly, you will get it with time. My job was to raise your interest and to help you appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope I did justice to this. I know I was short my runway by some time, but we don't do this every time. And I hope you learned something. I would actually, I request that, maybe the floor is open so I take 1 or 2 questions or comments, or if it's read to me. But thank you all for listening. I wish you well in 2024. Pay attention to the news and then use that information. Remember, you can teach yourself. You can understand it. This stuff was made by human beings like you and I. Thank you and cheers.